I often describe Paymail as email that supports Bitcoin. So I want to go into a bit about why it's important that Paymail is consistent with email and can be seen as an extension of email, as well as ways that we can improve email itself by using Paymail. So first of all, email is simply this idea that you have something, an email address with a name at a domain name or a local part at domain, and you can send email. You can send messages to someone's email address. And this protocol goes back, as best I can tell, to the 1980s. There are standards from the 80s. There are RFC documents. I've got a recent one here called RFC 5322 that goes all the way back to RFC 822 from the 1980s, specifying some of this stuff. Let's see if I can find a date here. I don't see a date, but I believe this is from the 1980s. So email is a fairly old standard as far as internet technologies go. And what it is just a way to send a message to another person on the internet. So actually it's kind of interesting. So the title of this, okay, so it's August 13, 1982, standard for the format of ARPA internet text messages, RFC 822. So this is, as best I can tell, the original standard specification for email. So the whole idea of it was basically just a way to send text messages from one person to another on the internet in 1982. Okay, so a lot has happened between then and now, but email is actually still widely used, and of course it's evolved a bit. And one of the ways in which email has evolved is it's not simply used as a messaging system right now. It's also used as an identity system. Your email address, you almost certainly use your email address, or perhaps more than one of them, as a way to log into services that you use. So I personally log into things like Slack and social media and stuff like this using my email address. Of course, MoneyButton itself, we rely on the users having an email address right now. We support email, but we don't yet support phone numbers. So you log into MoneyButton. My very company relies on this, and so do many other companies rely on using email as effectively an identity system. It's your name, and it's a way to authenticate. And the way that you authenticate with an email address is actually not using cryptography or anything like this. You simply prove ownership of the email address by, you can do things like, when you log in, they send you an email and you click a link with a unique identifier in it. And that proves that only somebody that can access the email account can actually have that identifier. So it's a way to actually authenticate using email. Okay, so today on the internet, email is extremely widely used. The other sort of naming system, so to speak, that's widely used on the internet is phone numbers. Phone numbers are used in a similar way. It's a messaging system that is also often used as a form of authentication. So with devices that, or I should say devices and applications where they don't support email, usually the alternative is a phone number. So you can log in with your phone into many different services. I think phone numbers are a little bit worse. Phone numbers don't really provide the information we need to query a service provider. They also are a little bit harder to remember, and they're also a little bit less user-friendly in the sense of it's not user customizable. You can't get the name that you want with the phone number because it's not even a name. With that being said, phone numbers are extremely widely used as well. But we didn't use phone numbers, we use email. Email is a little bit more user-friendly, and it's extremely common, and it's also a little bit more decentralized in the sense that you don't get permission from the phone companies to start setting up these services. You can just spool up a server. You do have to buy a domain name, but they're extremely cheap. Okay, so anyway, all right, so email is widely used today both for messaging and for authentication as an identity system. So this matters because imagine you are actually trying to pitch a system of some sort to either to small businesses or to large businesses like Google and Microsoft. You don't want to have to deal with this naming problem where they have to change their name in order to use your system. So just imagine hypothetically you go pitch this to Google. So first of all, Google has google.com. They're going to want to continue to use google.com because that basically is their internet name. You can't go to Google and say, hey, we built this wonderful system and it's going to improve Google, by so much, except that you have to change your primary name from, google.com to google.bit. Well, they're just not going to do that. You just seem absolutely silly. The value proposition you have to give to get them to actually change their primary name would be extremely high. It makes way more sense if they don't have to change their name. They can keep using google.com. Consider also their customers of Gmail. So the people that use Gmail, Imagine pitching Google on integrating something like this into Gmail. Well, there are a lot of people that use Gmail, and I'll say it must be the most popular email service provider. On MoneyButton, about half of users use Gmail, so it's definitely the most popular email service provider, at least for our users, and I'm pretty sure in the world. Outside of China, it's hard to know the details of China. China's kind of its own market, but certainly outside of China, it is the most popular email service provider. Now, all these people using Gmail, I mean, you can't have them say, okay, we've provided this wonderful service to you, but you've got to get a new name and tell everyone what your new name is. Like update everyone's contact list and everything like this. It's so much better and so much easier to pitch this if they don't have to change their name. If the email address that you're already using for your personal or for your business email on Gmail can stay the same and you just get new features. So imagine, one way this could work is something like, imagine we create a peer-to-peer encrypted messaging system consistent with email, and we make it completely compatible with emails in such a way that they can literally add this into Gmail. And now when you send an email to someone that has that supports Paymail, that it shows you a green checkbox next to their name that it is secure because it's using cryptography inside the Paymail protocol. That way you don't have to change anything, you just get a benefit. It's purely beneficial with no cost. At least as far as the user experience is concerned. You don't have to change your name. You don't have to get everybody to update your contact list. Contact lists all still work because it's just an email address. But you gain additional benefits to it. You can send emails securely, and you can have money because it'll be a Bitcoin wallet, and you can do anything else that you want to do with Paymail, which is basically the centerpiece of identity. And so it's going to be possible to actually pitch this technology to Google and Gmail, and as well as things like, for any other email service provider. Microsoft is another very popular one. It's a realistic way to pitch this stuff to these companies and to actually get them to adopt it. If you have to go pitch them on everybody's going to have to change their name, it just makes the pitch like a million times harder. I mean, it's just so disinteresting that yes, we can solve these problems, but you have to take this enormous cost of having everyone, every single one of your users is going to have to adopt a new name. It just isn't going to happen. So we got to, it's a way to solve that problem. Okay, but now what I want to talk about in the rest of this video is actually a bit of the detailed information about how we can actually improve email itself. So first of all, Paymail is consistent with email in that, imagine you are an email service provider. You can actually add support for Paymail in addition to email. Paymail is an additional protocol that you can add in on top of email. So let's take Gmail again as an example. As I've said in previous videos, we're not talking with Google. Maybe one day I'll be fortunate and be able to talk with Google about these things. But we're not talking with Google. I'm using Google as an example because they're such an enormous email service provider. Okay, so imagine your Gmail and you have hundreds of millions of people using your service for email. And you want to bring new features to it. You want to do things like, well, let's first of all talk about bringing end-to-end encryption to email. This is kind of the holy grail of email security that has never happened. Going back to the 1990s, there is this standard invented called PGP, and there's a long, interesting history behind PGP. PGP stands for Pretty Good Privacy. It was created by, I hope I don't get this history wrong as I try to say this on the fly here, but it was Phil Zimmerman, as I remember correctly, was the inventor of PGP, and there's people like Hal Finney was also involved, and there was a very interesting sort of series of legal events that occurred around PGP because PGP was actually seen as a munition according to the U.S. government. So because it was invented and written in the U.S., it was considered illegal to export the source code like outside of the United States, which brought up these interesting sort of subjects around like free speech. So I think this ended up going to court, and what it ended up being resolved was that, okay, well, if you just share the source code, that is actually okay to export this outside of the United States. So there's a long history there. I'm not intimately familiar with the history, but there's a very interesting history with PGP, and the story of PGP ended up clarifying U.S. law and making it so that you definitely can export cryptography outside of the United States, and that's okay, and there's nothing illegal about that. So PGP is very historically important for that reason. Unfortunately, PGP is absolutely not historically important because everyone uses it, because everyone doesn't use PGP. PGP was only ever used by a niche audience. It never went mainstream. And I think there are a number of issues with PGP. I mean, first of all, PGP basically requires that everyone have a permanent public key. Well, as I stated in previous videos on why the public key in Paymail is semi-stable, not permanent, it's a very unrealistic assumption that a person has a permanent key. This just isn't reality. I mean, there's no normal user that can manage their own key and actually keep it securely forever. It just doesn't realistically happen. And as I've said, we even have very sophisticated users, humorously sophisticated. Like, I'm not saying any names because I don't want to embarrass anyone, but the most sophisticated users lose their passwords. So you got to be able to work around this. You just cannot have a system whereby the public keys are permanent. It's extremely unrealistic. Also, it's just cumbersome. I mean, users are not going to want to manage their keys. Now, we have not perfected the user experience of this yet, but we're working on ways to resolve all this stuff, and I remain confident. I think, in a nutshell, the way to think about this is what's going to end up happening is you're just going to have devices that have keys embedded in them that are in HSMs or these hardware security modules, whereby the keys never leave the devices. And this is true for modern smartphones. Already have these things in them. Recent iPhones and recent Android phones already have this in there. So it doesn't necessarily support everything that we need yet. But clearly that's the direction all this is going in. It's extremely useful to have these cryptography devices built in. The keys are in there. The user will never actually see their own keys. What the user will have will be a number of different devices that use multi-sig and threshold signatures to communicate with one another. So long as you have one of your devices, you can always log into another device by authenticating on the first device. So you can have a backup device stored in a safe. You could even go back to your hospital of birth and they could have the original key or something like this in case you lose all of your keys. In any case, you will never have to actually see the key. You'll just have devices that you are authenticated with. And the key itself is secure inside the device and practically impossible for anyone to take the key out of there. And you never have to see it. You don't have to manage it yourself, other than don't lose all of your devices. Similar to, it's a bad idea to lose your birth certificate or passport. You will be able to lose it, but then it'll be extremely cumbersome and you have to rely on other people to recover your key for you. But it will be possible using things like threshold signatures and multisig. These things are possible. So anyway, that's how I see the future going in that respect. So anyway, the point is that keys are absolutely not permanent. That's part of the problem with PGP, and the second part of the problem is that just the whole idea of users managing their keys to begin with is just, I think, pretty much unworkable. So anyway, we can go one better than that. As I said in the previous video, we ought to regard it as a big deal that we've managed to attach a public key to an email address, and the user basically doesn't have to do anything. I mean, it's kind of amazing that we've added this in without having the user do as much key management, I should say, as they are used to. Now, in MoneyButton itself, we currently have we recommend that everyone write down their mnemonic, and we recommend that you don't forget your password. So we haven't solved this problem yet, but what I'm trying to say is that it is solvable using these ideas. Okay, so anyway, let's get back to Gmail. So imagine you want to do something like end-to-end encrypted email inside Gmail. If Gmail adds support for Paymail and the recent protocols that we created around signatures and encryption, they would be able to do end-to-end encrypted email. And you can do it in a way that is a generic protocol that everyone can use. That is to say, Gmail could be compatible with ProtonMail, and ProtonMail could be compatible with Microsoft. And Microsoft could be compatible with whatever other software people want to use. It is a generic protocol that anyone can use. So the way it would work is basically something like, you open up Gmail, one day they add support for Paymail, and now you've got a key in there, and you don't know what the key is, and you don't care. But you know that anyone else that has support for Paymail, when you go to send them an email, there's a green checkbox next to their name, and it says, this email is encrypted end-to-end and is secure. Right? It would probably just say something like, this email is private, or this email is secure, and without knowing the details, or you click a details button and it tells you all about what Paymail is and how all the stuff works. But the point is that we'll be able to just add this in, and you'll be able to just log into Gmail, and now you have end-to-end encrypted email. So email in a nutshell consists of the email addresses. We have protocols for sending the email called SMTP, as well as the structure of an email, sort of the data structure. The email addresses we're keeping because that's still in Paymail. The data structure we can keep too, just because there's so much legacy infrastructure around what the data structures look like. So these headers and bodies of an email address, of the email message itself, with like to and from and CC and all this stuff, and the subject and then the body. All that stuff can be the same. It's legacy and it's a bit irritating to deal with, but there's a lot of software that's already written to manage this stuff, and so we're probably going to want to keep that stuff the same. What we want to do is we want to encrypt the entire thing and send it using peer-to-peer encrypted messaging as I described in my previous video. So using those ideas, we can basically make it whereby when you send the email, the way it works is it identifies the recipient or recipients, it encrypts it to them, and then it delivers it. It notices that the recipient does support Paymail because it can just query the DNS record and the .well-known file and all that stuff. If they support Paymail, it encrypts it using their public, it queries their public key, encrypts it to their public key, and then delivers it inside of a transaction peer-to-peer using the peer-to-peer transaction broadcast endpoint, which I was trying to explain is something we don't currently support, but that's exactly what we're working on right now, and it's like a critical missing piece that we'll be launching soon. So you can deliver that, and it can be on-chain. It also doesn't have to be on-chain. Perhaps the best way to do email is actually to default off-chain. I actually think it's okay, and it's actually a good idea for everything to just go ahead and be on-chain. I don't think it's realistic that people are going to be cracking these things. Now, if you lose your keys, that does mean that people would be able to decrypt it. But you gain a lot of benefits from putting this stuff on chain. You get a permanent record that you can access at any later time. You never have to worry about backing up your data. It is unrealistic that people are going to decrypt it most of the time. So I think for most use cases, that's good. And you get this sort of permanent log of everything that happened. So for people that are typically moral and legal, this is actually a good thing that you have a record of everything that happened. Of every message, you've got this sort of immutable log of all of your messaging history, so that if you ever have a dispute with someone, there's no dispute. You can just look at the log of what happened, and there you go. What are you arguing about? I've got every single message logged in a way that cannot possibly be modified, and this is what really happened, as we can see in the log. So disputes can be resolved using these immutable records of messaging. So what I'm trying to say in all this is that, well, we can add in user-friendly, secure, end-to-end encrypted email to email using Paymail. So we can extend. It's going to be possible that if we one day are so fortunate as to partner with Google, you'll just open up your Gmail account, and now you've got private end-to-end encrypted messaging. You don't have to do anything differently. We just like upped the overall quality of email. In case what I'm saying isn't clear because I didn't explain all the details, but email is actually not encrypted by default. I mean, it just isn't secure by default. Now it's gotten a little bit better over time because they've wrapped email itself in a bunch of other protocols. Like there's now service providers send emails to each other encrypted, but it's not end-to-end encrypted, and the service providers do read your email. They can see what you're saying, and so that's not really very private. These intermediaries see it, and that's how Google delivers ads to you and stuff like this. But we can do real encrypted, end-to-end email this way. Okay, and of course, everything else gets better too. So things like authentication, because now you have something that can be used. You can authenticate using cryptography. You can authenticate by signing something, by swiping money button. You can sign into a service and things like this. There are a number of other interesting services that we can provide when you consider all this stuff. So Paymail isn't just about cryptography, of course. It's also about money and contracts and things like this. So when you add in support for Paymail to an email address, not only do you get private, secure, encrypted end-to-end messaging, but also money inside. You can send money with the mail. This is incredible. This is the very idea of peer-to-peer electronic cash on the internet. This is exactly what we want to be able to do. You can email money to someone. That's amazing. And with it's peer-to-peer, and there's it's like there's no intermediary in all this stuff. That's shocking. That's actually possible. This is exactly what we're building with email and Paymail. So you'll be able to do that. You'll be able to just email money to someone. It's like the fantasy of PayPal. It's like what they kind of wanted to do in the 1990s, but didn't quite build that. They made something different instead. They've got like a halfway solution where you can kind of email money to people with a bunch of drawbacks. This would be like literally emailing money to people. You're emailing them digital cash. And it's actually a little bit different than what someone might have originally thought, because the transaction isn't contained inside of the email, but actually the email is contained inside of a transaction. That we're actually using the digital cash layer is actually the infrastructure that we're actually using to actually contain the message itself. So as I've described in previous videos, Bitcoin is Bitcoin. You can look at it as the unification of information and money. It is both of these things combined, and you need both of them. And so that means it can store and transmit information as well. Okay. So so we can send money around. Then you can also do things like there are products, like there's a product called BitBounce. where you have to pay someone money to be able to send them a message. And of course, I've previously talked about my irritation with being trolled on social media, and this is a large part of the reason why I don't use actually any social media whatsoever anymore aside from chat rooms. I'm so turned off from the whole thing because I've been trolled basically for saying the truth about all this stuff, and to have hordes of internet trolls who don't like the truth that I have to say troll me continuously. It's like, well, it's not even worth my time to look at social media if that's what my experience is going to be. The way this should work is I should be able to set a price for sending me a message. I should be able to say, okay, I'm willing to allow unsolicited messages to me, but I want to set a price. If I don't already know who you are and haven't added you to my whitelist, you have to pay me X dollars to be able to send a message to me. We can build this into a protocol layer to Paymail. So what you do is you set up a new Paymail capability, as I described in the previous video. You add a new capability that says, here's the cost of sending a message to me that doesn't go into my spam box. And that cost is configurable by the user. So I will set mine at, I don't know what I'll set it at, $1, $5, $10, something like this. I'll probably set mine relatively low. But you can actually imagine a really interesting scenario whereby this actually becomes widely used, and everyone in the world now actually has the freedom to publish their contact information. The reason why no one likes to publish their contact information publicly is because they know that trolls and bullies are going to use that to attack them. So you got to be really secretive about your contact information. You got to meet someone first. This creates a really big barrier to actually communicating with anyone. We can actually lower the barrier and make the barrier explicit by actually adding in this cost to sending a message. So a user configurable paywall that the sender has to blast through to be able to send a message to you. So imagine a world where this is actually widely used. What would actually happen? Consider someone like Donald Trump, a very high profile and controversial figure. Some people like him, some people don't like him, but lots of people want to send him a message. Donald Trump would probably set a very high fee because he can't set the fee low because he would get too many messages. But if he set the fee high, he's actually making it possible for anyone in the world to send him a message, but they do have to be willing to pay it. They do have to be willing to pay whatever that cost is. But they can send him a message. They actually do have his contact information. So it becomes possible to actually have a way to communicate with anyone in the world by leveraging this. And you have to recognize that there actually is a cost for them to actually receive and process and read the message. And so therefore they're just making that cost explicit in terms of money instead of in some obscure, complicated way. But it makes the cost very explicit. And so I look at this as actually, if we're ever going to make the entire human social graph into a small world network, this is what we would want to do. This is a way to actually allow everyone to be connected to each other, is by making those costs explicit. If you have some reason to send Donald Trump a message, you now have the ability to do so, but you're going to have to pay whatever his fee is. And everyone would be able to do this, and everyone would set a fee that's actually appropriate for who they are and so on. You can combine this with things like whitelisting, whereby your regular contacts don't have to pay you anything. You could also do things where if someone hasn't contacted you a long time, the fee changes or whatever it is. Now, I'm not saying that everyone has to do this. You do whatever you want to do. What I'm saying is this is a feature that would be useful to some people, and it would be something that exists at a protocol layer. It is not an application. You can write applications that do it, but this is a protocol that I'm describing. That's the interesting thing. It's a way of actually having a protocol for specifying this is just the cost of sending me a message. And it's not a proprietary application owned by some company. It's a protocol that anyone can adopt. So every wallet could have this, every messaging application could have this, and so on. Okay, so that's it. Let me conclude by summarizing all this stuff. That the point is that, first of all, Paymail is consistent with email. First of all, because it has technical properties that we need. Secondly, because we don't have to get major email service providers or businesses to change their name. It will become possible for them to just add in support for Paymail and gain extra features, which makes pitching them on this technology radically easier. We can realistically pitch them on this now because they're not going to have to change their name. And finally, we have a number of wonderful additional features that we can add into email using Paymail that are like fundamental advances. We can create end-to-end encrypted email that the user can just turn it on and now they've got better email. We can include payments. We can make it that you can actually simply email money to someone. We can also do things like the bit bounce idea at a protocol level, whereby everyone can specify a cost for things. And of course, we can combine this with all sorts of other things like logging in with Paymail, signing documents with Paymail, and doing anything that you need a name for. You could even cross the border with your Paymail, okay? So anyway, that's it in a nutshell. Paymail is seen as an extension to email. And please, thank you for watching these videos. And if you have any, feedback, I listen to all the feedback, and we're going to keep producing content like this. All right, that's it. Thank you for listening.